Well, yes, I'm Scott Gillingham, and running for mayor. And I believe I've got the right experience right now, current experience, having been on council for 2 terms, representing St. James. I think I have the right experience right now to know what the city does well and what we need to change to seize the opportunities for our city for the future, but then also to address some of the challenges that we are facing as a city, right at this moment. Some of those challenges kind of will be barriers unless we address them, barriers to growth, barriers to building the kind of city that we want to build. I'm married. My wife Marla and I have been married for 29 years. We have 2 adult children, Hannah and Andrew, 26 and 24 years old. And before being elected to city council in 2014, I was an ordained minister, pastoring for over 20 years. Was born in Brandon, grew up just outside of Winnipeg. We moved into Winnipeg pretty much right after high school. And during my time on council, I've served in many roles as a councillor, 2 primary roles. In addition to being a councillor, for the first 2 years, I chaired the police board. And when Chief Devon Lewis was chief of police. And then chaired the finance committee for 5.5, almost 6 years, including during the pandemic. Which had a significant impact to the city's finances. Over $220 million of financial impact can be associated to the pandemic. And then last winter, if you remember, we came through one of the snowiest winters on record. And because it's really snowy, that means it's really expensive to the city of Winnipeg when it comes to snow clearing operations as well. Chaired finance through those very difficult times. And thankfully we came out of the pandemic, and the credit rating agencies actually gave us an increase, which is a positive thing, increased our credit rating, citing good financial management. I give credit to our corporate finance team. We have a whole department of professionals who are excellent when it comes to running the city's finances, and they really assisted me as the chair of finance, and so their outstanding work, coupled with the decisions we made as politically, have assisted us. And so, so I don't know if should I just go into addressing these topics, or do you want to ask me questions on the topics on the board behind you?
We'll start with Shauna Turnley.
Hi. Thanks for coming in. So I'm covering the issue of homelessness, which has been quite a priority among Winnipeggers. So if you want to talk about it generally, like how you plan to tackle that issue.
The pandemic really exacerbated homelessness, and talking to people that work with homeless individuals, I think what maybe was not seen before is now seen, because it brought homelessness and unsheltered kind of from people that maybe were kind of, we call it couch surfing, or staying with relatives for a time during the pandemic, moved out into the street. Couple that with addiction. Not all homelessness is associated with addiction. Much of it is, though, and mental health. I've stated that getting people into homes, housing first, is really critical. As mayor, I will the goal will be to tap into the federal government's 3rd round of rapid housing initiative funding. Take 6 city Winnipeg properties that are surplus properties, work with council to determine where those properties are, and rezone them, pre-zone them, so that we can build modular housing with the federal government's rapid housing initiative. The good thing about the rapid housing initiative funding is that it requires that the housing be built within 12 months. So it's not a promise I'm going to make, and then 5 or 6 years down the road, we still haven't built them. The rapid housing initiative those funds have to be expended, and the housing built within 12 months. We will take those 6 properties and build modular housing. Think of Lego. How you build kind of, pieces on pieces. Building the modular housing, we could build up to about 270 units on those 6 properties. The program is working, the modular housing program is working in Toronto and Surrey right now. We would copy that model. Then we take the housing, and we'd work with third-party agencies who run housing. I'm not looking as mayor to get into the housing department. I'm not looking to open a new housing department. Rather, provide the land, get the federal funding, build the modular housing, and then turn it over to third-party groups that run housing, and this is key, provide the associated wraparound services that individuals need. Then we can go to a bus shelter and say to someone, you can't stay here. We're not kicking you out to go to another bus shelter, and we're not kicking you out to go live in a park or down the river. We're bringing you into housing and providing you the wraparound services you need. That's why relationship with the province is so important, a good relationship. So much of what individuals facing homelessness right now need are provincial services. So build modular housing and provide housing for individuals that way.
And where is this money coming from?
Yeah, so the federal government has a program called the Rapid Housing Initiative Program. And the program has been up and running for a couple of years, 2, maybe 3 years. Prime Minister Trudeau's government has been prioritizing housing, especially housing for individuals who are unsheltered right now. In this last couple of years, there's actually been 2 rounds of that housing that has come in and through Winnipeg. What happens is the federal government gives it to Winnipeg, and Winnipeg is a city where we kind of like this flow through. So there have been at least, I think, 8 different housing projects built in the last 2 rounds of housing. One is at Salvation Army, just on Main Street, not too far from here. I just toured it a couple weeks ago, where they took the Rapid Housing Initiative from the federal government, flows through the city of Winnipeg, and we help manage it. It goes to an organization like Salvation Army, and they built, I believe it's 14 units within their building, renovated it, and it's for women. It's for women who have either come out of prison or have come out of incidents of trafficking. And so it's their housing, it's transitional housing, they can stay as long as they want. When I was there, I met one woman who I actually run into at a coffee shop, and she asked if I remembered her, and I had. And she now has come from a life of so many challenges. Now she's halfway through taking her social work degree. She says she's going to turn around and kind of give back. So that's federal money that's being used for that.
So none of the city's budget is going to this. You are relying strictly on federal funds.
Yeah, it's federal funding. You're right, because it's worked before, so it's federal funding now. What we did is, when I was chair of finance, is we city money. We did hire 2 individuals, two positions at the city of Winnipeg to help manage that federal program. So the city's making a small investment sort of thing.
And sorry, do you think that 2 positions is enough?
I believe it is right now because, again, the goal is not to open my goal as mayor is not to open a whole housing department and staff it, because housing is really under the purview of the provincial government and to some degree federal government. Right. So what's really important, I've learned over the last 8 years as councillor and as chair of finance, it would be really important for me as mayor, is to make sure that to the degree possible, the city of Winnipeg is, I'll say, staying in our lane. There are core services the city of Winnipeg is responsible to deliver. Housing is actually not one of the core services because it's under the responsibility of another level of government. But we have to be a partner. As mayor, I want to make sure I'm a partner and our city is a partner, because at the end of the day, there are men and women on the street who need housing.
Let's move on to transit. Emma, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Emma Honeybun. I'll be asking you all the transit questions. I just wanted to begin and ask you about your thoughts on the transit system right now and what you're planning on doing with it in the future.
I was really proud to be part of the development and adoption of the city's current transit master plan. The transit master plan is an aspirational plan. It is the plan that we need to build a modern transit system for a modern city. So I'm committed and dedicated. I will be moving towards the implementation and act on the next steps to implement the transit master plan. I will say of the 2 councillors running for mayor, the other councillor voted against the transit master plan. He was the only councillor to vote against the transit master plan. It's a good plan. It will make transit more reliable, more frequent, and more efficient. And we as a city, we need that. We need more reliability, more frequency for our transit system. So I'm committed to that. I've dedicated that as mayor, I will add 11 new buses in each of the next 3 years, if elected, to make sure that the next steps of our transit master plan can be implemented and we can have more frequency, more reliability. During COVID, we reduced transit service because transit ridership dropped off. you all students were working from home, right? And the universities were closed, and the colleges were closed to on-campus learning. So our revenues dropped and the ridership dropped. And so we reduced our transit service by 6%. Even right now, our transit service is operating at a 94% level. I said that as mayor, as of next year, 2023, we would go back to 100% transit service. That would make sure there's more reliability and frequency for people. Then on top of that, adding 11 buses per year to take the next steps in implementing the transit master plan.
Thank you. Sorry, brain fart. You said you wanted to increase ridership to get us back to a pre-pandemic level next year. How will you go about doing that if people are still afraid of taking the bus?
It's a great question. So we have to make sure that transit is a safe place for people, and people that are riders have the confidence to ride the bus. As mayor, I've committed to making sure that, for example, in downtown, the Downtown Community Safety Partnership, which provides security in the downtown. Right now, their funding is supposed to end at the end of 2023. I've said that as mayor, I will extend the funding all the way through the next term of council to 2026. They work in the downtown in some of the key areas along Portage Avenue, Main Street, Graham Avenue, and other places where some of the transit security and bus shelters is a challenge. I spoke a little bit about homelessness and helping those who are in bus shelters get out of bus shelters. We need to make the transit shelters fully available for transit users again, because really the transit shelter is part of the transit service. The province of Manitoba right now is looking at bringing in peace officers. It would be a new level of security and policing. I will encourage them to do that. I've already said that as mayor, one of my first discussions with the Premier will be to encourage the Premier to implement the peace officer program that's working in Alberta and other places. Because 2 officers with badges and guns are really expensive. And it's perhaps not the best form of security. We can use peace officers and downtown community safety partnership folks to help provide security in and around our transit shelters. At the end of the day, also though, like where there is crime, and if crime is occurring in a transit shelter, police should enforce the rules and the law. Make no mistake about it. But we need to make sure that our transit system is safer. Worked really hard as a council. We secured funding from the federal and provincial governments and the city's contribution as well to make sure that the bus radio system on our transit buses is updated. So we're going to have a $17 million basically new bus system, radio system, communication system, so that if there is an issue on a bus, without a doubt, the transit operator can call 911, get the help they need.
And one more question.
Yeah.
To implement 11 new buses, how are you planning on budgeting that, and how much of the city budget will go towards making those improvements?
I've released my platform. Actually, just came from that this morning. The full platform with the full cost. I've committed to raising taxes by 3.5%, and then also raising the frontage levy, one-time frontage levy increase of $1.50. A portion of the property tax increase would go towards purchasing new buses and strengthening the transit system as well.
Thank you.
Moving on to roads. Caleb, Duick.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Gillingham. I'm Caleb Duick. I'm going to be covering the topic of roads. I just want to know what you think about the issue generally, and then I have a few follow-up questions.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Generally, I can tell you that I want to build on my record as chair of the Finance Committee, who introduced several budgets in a row that had record level funding for roads and infrastructure. Record level funding of roads to repair both our local streets, which are the residential streets that we live on, and the regional streets as well. I've committed that as mayor, I will increase the roads budget by $50 million over the next 3 years so that we can repair and fix more of our roads. And I've also committed to widening Keniston Boulevard and extending Chief Peguis Trail. As mayor, I will act on the next steps to make sure that both of those projects go forward. The next steps are, first of all, both on Chief Peguis Trail. And Chief Peguis Trail, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it would extend from Main Street, the new extensions, it would extend from Main Street all the way west to Route 90. And Keniston Boulevard widening will be from the south Taylor Avenue Street, all the way north, including the St. James Bridge, over the Assiniboine River. So from Taylor all the way to Ness. The first step is we need to get an updated cost estimate on those two projects. We have initial cost estimates, but they're a few years old. The cost of everything's gone up. We need new cost estimates. The second step will be to do a business case analysis on them, so we can determine the return on the investment. If we make an investment as taxpayers in widening Keniston Boulevard and extending Chief Peguis Trail, we need to know what return on it we're going to get on our investment. Once we have that, I can go to the federal and provincial governments to show them the return on their investment and ask them to cost share in the widening of Keniston Boulevard and the building of Chief Peguis Trail.
Yes, and okay, so can you elaborate on the neighborhood action team to maintain local streets? What is that and what does it mean?
Neighborhood action teams would be 30 new employees to the city of Winnipeg, divided into 3 teams of 10. What we would do is cross-train them. Right now, if you have a pothole on your street, the pothole crew comes and they fill the pothole and they drive away. And driving away, they might leave it. There may be trees that need to be trimmed. There might be curbs that need to be repaired. There might be a stop sign that's fallen over. But the pothole crew only does potholes, and away they go. You have to wait for the next crew to come along to put the sign back up, and then wait for another crew to come and repair the curb. The neighborhood action teams would be cross-trained individuals who could do all of it. So in the same way that if you've ever had a to-do list that you work through, right? You just tackle all the to-do lists and the various jobs on the to-do list. Imagine it that way, that a neighborhood action team descends upon your community with a to-do list, and they fill the pothole, and they trim the tree, and they fix the curb, and they straighten the sign, and they spend, let's say, a week in your community. Well, by the time they've been there a week, the whole community looks better. And if they come back within 10 months and tackle more of the to-do list, by the time they've been in your community 2 or 3 times, the whole place looks better. And when our city looks better, we feel better about ourselves. And so that's what the neighborhood action teams would do.
Thank you. And when you propose to modernize construction of roads, what do you mean? Does that also include holding road builders to the highest inspection standards?
Yes to that last question. Yes, holding road builders to the highest inspection standards so that we all are getting value for our money. Modernizing construction, road construction in our contracts. To do that, I would hire a chief construction officer. And the chief construction officer would, among other things, make sure that all of our capital projects, including our roads projects, are coordinated. Sometimes what can happen is a road crew will come in and they'll fix a road. But next year, the water and waste department needs access to the pipes under the ground, and they'll cut the road open and work on the pipes. And so you've got a brand new road that has been cut into. I want to make sure that we're avoiding that. And so our chief construction officer would make sure our contracts are coordinated, the various work is coordinated. They would also make sure that we are getting value for money, the projects are getting done on time and on budget. And the chief construction officer would also help by giving council professional advice so we can avoid things like what happened years before I got onto council, a few years before I got onto council, and that's the police headquarters overrun and all of what is now fraud, where the city's alleging fraud took place. A chief construction officer can assist the council in avoiding those kind of overruns by providing council with the best information in real time. The chief construction officer I envision would be someone who has years of private sector experience, but also understands the public sector as well. And they can make sure the city of Winnipeg has the most up-to-date, best-in-class contracts that we're providing that are fair, have the right clauses in them to hold people to account, and making sure that as taxpayers we're getting the work we're paying for.
We need to move on to active transportation.
Hi, I'm Rachel Firstel. I'm covering active transportation. How important is this topic to you, and what do you plan to do about it?
I like riding my bike on our active transportation pathways. I live in St. James, and quite often when I can, I will ride to City Hall. I'm a fair weather rider. I don't ride in winter. I should not be so scared. I should ride in winter and brave it, put on warmer clothes. But I just ride in the summertime. I also enjoy just riding leisurely and making making use of the city's trails and active transportation pathways. I have said that I will double the active transportation budget in the next 3 years. Right now, as we look at the budget forecast, there's $12 million budgeted for active transportation in the next 3 years. I will add another $13 million. So part of the tax increase and the frontage levy increase will go towards adding more bike lanes and specifically closing some of the gaps in our cycling infrastructure. And beyond cycling infrastructure, also pathways as well. I was meeting with a community of Indian seniors who live in a new neighborhood, and they said to me, Scott, we have a new neighborhood, we love where we live, but we don't have any sidewalks. So we really need those pathways because we like to get out and walk, in the evenings. So these are the kind of investments and the kind of infrastructure that can build through active transportation. Yes, it's cycling paths, but it's also the pathways for people to walk on as well. Over the last several years, there have been instances where roads have been built that were supposed to include, or rebuilt, that were supposed to include the addition of an active transportation pathway, and it didn't get built. That can't happen anymore, and so I'm going to hire 2 individuals that make sure that any road work that is to include active transportation includes the active transportation. In fact, I've said those 2 individuals will get signing authority. So you can't sign off on building the road unless those 2 individuals in the active transportation division also sign off on the building of that road. That way we make sure that the active transportation infrastructure gets built as per plan.
Are there any specific gaps in the cycling and sidewalk network that you plan to eliminate right away?
There are. I couldn't name them for you right now because that's where, for example, in hiring those 2 individuals, they could work with our current active transportation staff to make sure that the right priority of closing the gaps is determined and invested in. It's also critical that we work with groups like Bike Winnipeg as well, who's some of their staff have been excellent over the years to work with because they're like me. They want to collectively make sure we're making the right investments to build a better cycling network that promotes cycling. Can promote cycling and walking as a means of recreation and just good for your health, but also as mode shift also. If people have an option, a cycling option that is a separated bike lane, they're more likely to use that, to have more confidence to use that on their way to school or work or to pick up groceries. And so the city working in partnership with stakeholders is really important to make sure we identify which gaps need to be closed first.
There's a lot of animosity between cyclists and drivers in the city. How do you plan to deal with concerns drivers have as you improve active transportation in Winnipeg?
Yes, there's animosity. I think, certain social media platforms, you hear it the loudest there. From the time I started cycling years ago to now, I find, and this is just my own anecdotal experience, right? So this isn't a study, this is just God telling you my own experience. It seems that drivers more and more are more accepting of cyclists, and they should be. The road is not just for drivers. And so I think the more infrastructure we have and the more cyclists we see on the street, the better it is. But we have to make sure it's safe for cyclists, and that's key. There's still too many drivers that either are not paying attention to cyclists on the road or get too impatient with cyclists on the road. We've got to make sure that we're investing in infrastructure that means it's not only promoting cycling, but it's making it safer for cyclists as well.
Thank you.
Moving on to our next topic, lease budget.
My name's Sarah Sanders, and I'm going to be asking you about the Winnipeg police budget. Obviously, the budget has kind of come up as a very big topic in the last couple of months, I would say. What are your general thoughts and feelings about it?
I have worked very hard over my 8 years to control the rate of growth of the police budget. And I will build on that. If you look at the rate of growth in the police budget prior to my time on council, compared to during my time on council, we slowed the growth rate. But it is 27% of the operating budget. It is the biggest portion of the budget. So I will make sure to do all I can to control its growth. What many people perhaps don't appreciate is that 85% of the police budget is related to salaries and benefit costs. And those are established through the collective bargaining process. And if through collective bargaining, the city is the employer and the Winnipeg Police Association cannot reach an agreement, the Winnipeg Police Association has the option of going to binding arbitration. And then it's out of the hands of council and the mayor and goes to an arbitrator. I think it's fair to say that most often when a collective bargaining process goes to arbitration for policing, the arbitrator rules more in favor of, when it comes to dollars and cents, the police association than the city of Winnipeg as the employer. But I will work to control the rate of growth in the police budget. Key to this, though, is making sure that police are freed up to do police work. We did the analysis at the City Council within the last 2 years of the calls for service. Over 50% of and this is a matter of public record, so the report is available online on our DEMA system at one of the committees. Over 50% of the calls for service that police attend to, at their core, are not policing calls. The simplest way to say it is you don't need 2 officers with badges and guns responding. Another agency would be a better, more appropriate response to the call for service. And so, in simplest terms, we need to separate those calls for service. We need to separate police calls from social services calls. Right now, if someone is in the midst of let's say, a methamphetamine high, and they're taken to the hospital, they may not be committing a crime, but they're in a state of high. It's really a medical call. But the 2 officers from a car are required to sit with that individual in health sciences emergency for as long as needed. So they could be sitting there tied up with someone for hours at a time. Well, if officers are sitting with someone who's in the midst of a health crisis, they're not available to be on the street to prevent crime or respond to crime. So we must separate crime calls from social services calls and make sure that the right agency is responding to the call for service.
For sure, and you just mentioned those agencies. Where does the money come for these agencies to adequately support these individuals who might be going through this kind of crisis, right? Is that coming out of the police budget? Is it coming out of the city's budget? How is that money going to be allocated?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that goes back to what I said early on about the importance of a good relationship, which I'm committed to as mayor with the province of Manitoba and other agencies. So many of the calls, I'll give you a quick story. At the end of April, I went with the transit inspectors from transit shelter to transit shelter as they go every Monday to Friday to check on individuals who are living in transit shelters. We came to one transit shelter on Portage Avenue, and there was an individual there just after 6 in the morning who had overdosed. So we called 911. The 911 operator asked us to describe things, so the transit inspector described things, and we put the 911 operator on speakerphone. One inspector held the speakerphone up, the 911 operator communicated with the others. She said, based on what you're describing, you're going to have to start CPR, or chest compressions, on this man to keep him alive until the ambulance gets there. Started chest compressions. She was counting them out over the speakerphone. The fire truck pulled up, and 2 cross-trained firefighter paramedics got off, pulled the man's pants down a bit, and gave him a loxone in his upper thigh to keep him alive. Then the ambulance pulled up, then an ambulance supervisor pulled up. And I stood back in that moment and looked and thought, this is someone's son we're trying to keep alive. And then I looked and I counted, there were 12 12 City of Winnipeg employees. Transit inspectors, firefighters, paramedics supervisor, 911 operator, and myself. 12 City of Winnipeg employees there. What the man needs is no city service. He needs detox, long-term treatment, healthcare, mental health, and housing. All 5 of those things I just listed are under the purview of the province of Manitoba, not the City of Winnipeg. So that's why the partnership between the city and the province to tackle our challenges is so important. I will not blame the province. I won't throw stones at the province. I'll say to the province, let's work together to tackle these challenges that are shared challenges and to seize our shared opportunities.
For sure. And then just my last question. Obviously, the perceptions of the Winnipeg Police Service have been quite negative in the past couple months. How do you plan to mitigate that perception in the eyes of, Winnipeg citizens?
As mayor, I will sit on the police board. I'm the only mayoral candidate who's committed to doing that. I used to chair the police board. Under provincial law right now, the Police Services Act, the mayor and council have no authority to direct the police service. The police board, in fact, has no authority to direct the police service, but the police board is there under provincial law to establish policing so that policing is done, and these are the words lifted right from the Police Services Act, that is consistent with the community's needs and values and expectations. So the board establishes a strategic plan in consultation with the chief of police so that policing is done in that way. What is the community value? What's the kind of policing that meets the community's needs? And so that's the kind of policing model as board will develop, and then working with the chief and holding the chief to account, making sure that the programming and priorities are implemented. One of the things that I'm absolutely dedicated to doing is going back to focus on crime prevention. When I chaired the board, the Winnipeg Police Service and the RCMP used to have a joint task force, a warrant task force. And they would go after individuals who are in the community right now that are breaching court orders, and they're among us, and they're perpetuating more crime. But by court order, they're supposed to be in jail and incarcerated. So the services they need to transform their lives can catch up to them. We're going to go back to that. We're going to make sure we have that to prevent crime, to make sure that individuals, our community is safer that way.
Awesome, thank you.
That's a convenient segue to our final topic of the day, which is crime prevention.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Kelkit Milageta. I'm going to be asking questions about crime prevention. So I guess if you could just talk briefly about your general thoughts about how crime prevention is dealt with in the city of Winnipeg and what your plans are to improve that.
Thank you. Permit me to restate some of what I've said then already, and thank you for the question. First of all, I do want to acknowledge crime is a big issue in our city right now. It's one of the top issues. And so I'm absolutely, will be focused on making Winnipeg a safer community. Key to that is through crime prevention. I've talked about the need to make sure we establish, and I will reestablish, a joint unit. I'll be working with the province to reestablish a joint unit between the Winnipeg Police Service and the RCMP. That is a warrant unit. I've also said I will hire a crime analyst. Right now, there's the Winnipeg Police Service did a bit of a pilot program with a crime analyst in basically residents. We do have crime analysts at the city of Winnipeg right now, but the information they gather is held by the Winnipeg Police Service, and we as politicians don't get access to it. I will hire a crime analyst to that could report back to mayor and council, so we know what the crime trends are and where we need to focus our efforts in crime prevention. Key, though, to my plan for community safety is building a community safety plan with the key stakeholders. Imagine a table like the one we're sitting at right now. It would be this kind of table where I would build a community safety plan. Police would be at the table, but so would community agencies like the Bear Clan, Downtown Community Safety Partnership, the Province of Manitoba Housing, firefighters who deal with boarded up buildings, which are magnets, too often for crime. We'd also have family services from the province at the table. Also, business would be at the table. Other groups like Main Street Project, St. Boniface Treatment, and Homelessness Winnipeg. And collectively, we would build a coordinated, and that's key, a coordinated crime prevention plan to make Winnipeg safer. so that we can do this in partnerships. By nature, my style of leadership is a collaborative style of leadership. I don't have all the answers, but I know around this community and around the tables, collectively we can identify the answers and work on a coordinated plan and a coordinated solution. If I can just so go back to the question you asked about homelessness, I've also said that I would take one of my mayor's staff positions and hire an advisor on homelessness and addiction. So right in my mayor's, in my office, I take one of the positions and make them a liaison towards homelessness and addiction services. Sorry, it just reminded me, so I wanted to give it to you before I come back here.
If you could talk specifically about your plans to address violent crime towards Indigenous women and girls within the city of Winnipeg.
Thank you. I would build on what I've been doing for the last 8 years as councillor. The City of Winnipeg policies more increasingly have been informed by the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. And again, they're not recommendations, they're calls to action. So we've been acting on them, but also on the report, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women report that came out. An example, just recently, we adopted a new policy related to vehicles for hire. So that's taxis and Uber and things like that. So that all of those individuals that are driving get some training related to the history of missing and murdered Indigenous women and can be part of the solution and making Winnipeg safer for women, all women, especially Indigenous women. That change, that initiative, came right out of one of the calls and recommendations of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women report. I want to build on that. I want to continue to work with Indigenous organizations to make sure that the community is safer for Indigenous women. One of my announcements early, again it goes to homelessness and those that are on the street right now and unsheltered, I will extend the funding that we have in place as a city to 24/7 safe spaces. Right now the City of Winnipeg funds 2 organizations, West End 24/7, which really focuses on offering kind of a place for unsheltered people to go, especially youth to go, where they can get not only a meal and just get off the street, but also access to services. But then also in the north end, there's Velma's House, which is specifically there for Indigenous women or those identifying as Indigenous women to provide services for them. So they can also, if they're homeless, they can come off the street, and especially those who are fleeing violence, intimate partner violence. I've said that I would add money for a third 24/7 safe space and work with community organizations in the North End to determine where that should be and who should best run that.
And you said that you wanted to add money for a third one. So
yes.
How much money specifically are you thinking about giving towards that?
That's it. I can get you the answer to that because I looked at that. I can get you those answers. I don't have it off the top of my head right now. But right now, the funding for the 2, for West End 24/7 and Balance House was set to run out at the end of 2023. I said I would extend it and expand it. Eric, do you mind if you just go up to, it's right on my website there, Vote for Scott. If you go to that early announcement, the reason I don't remember is months ago, in the middle of summer, I made the announcement. But it's published online. It's right on my website there with the total dollar amount for that.
And then one last question is just how low do you think that the crime rate will be with you in office?
How low? I don't have a number, but the goal is to address crime to make Winnipeg safer, to see the crime rates stabilize and in fact drop. But it takes a coordinated effort, and what I'm committed to is a coordinated effort. To me, it's really about creating the environment and addressing the issues that drive crime. And if with the right partners around the table, committed to a coordinated plan to work on crime prevention, we will see the results we're looking for a safer Winnipeg.
Thank you so much.
That's all the time we have with Scott Gillingham. Thank you, Scott, for joining us today.
Thank you, James, and thank you, everybody here. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Thank you.
I think this was the release.
Yeah.
The 24/7 expect.